Because of my addiction I ended up in hell. Yes, in hell. A horrible place that I never imagined could exist, a place full of suffering and despair. That was not a destiny that I wanted, but somehow it was inevitable. Unfortunately I fell into the traps of the devil. But if you want to know how not to make the same mistake as me, subscribe to this channel and learn the traps of the devil through each testimony. Do not wait to be another victim and end up in this horrible place. My name is Jose. Since I can remember I was always someone who sought comfort in the small things in life. I was happy in my simplicity, surrounded by my family and the moments we shared. However, everything changed when I met alcohol. The first time I had a drink it seemed harmless, a simple toast at a party. I did not know that this liquid could transform into a chain that would imprison me over time. That drink that was a source of celebration began to consume me from within. What began as a form of relaxing after a tiring day quickly turned into an addiction, a treacherous friend I couldn't leave behind. I remember the nights when the bottle became my intimate companion instead of my family. The laughter and warm dialogues were replaced by heavy silences and fights. Every toast I made with friends was accompanied by tears that I refused to see, not only mine but those of my wife who suffered in silence. While I sank deeper and deeper into my addiction, I remember the broken expression on her face when I came home drunk and out of control. My innocent and bewildered children watched as her modern figure deteriorated without understanding why. I was a man who was once loved, now I had become a stranger in my own home. With each passing day the ties with my family disintegrated and I was aware of it, but the dependence on alcohol blinded me. I promised myself to quit, but promises were useless in front of the bottle. I went to bed full of fights, accusations and regrets, but every morning started the same way, with a devastating hangover and the constant desire to drink to quench the guilt I felt. This cycle began to take not only my health but my life. I was fired from my job and lost the honor and respect I once had. When I lost everything that mattered, I began to wonder if there was a way out. One night after an extreme binge I fell to the ground and would not wake up again. I was taken to the hospital in an alcoholic coma, not knowing that my true journey would begin in that unconscious state. During the coma, I experienced not only emptiness but a terrifying vision that would change my life forever. The moment I fell into the coma, I thought I was just floating in the void. There was no light or sound, just a space of endless darkness, but suddenly that darkness began to stir, transforming into a surreal landscape. What emerged from that chaos was not a dream but a nightmare. It was like being dragged into the essence of suffering, hell. I found myself in a horrible place surrounded by dancing flames, and the echo of agonizing screams, a sound that seemed to permeate the atmosphere itself, so cold. Despite the scorching heat that surrounded me, the feeling of despair was palpable, as if I were sinking in a sea of pain and remorse. At first I looked around and thought that this could not be real, but as I observed the exhausted faces that were nearby I realized that it was the painful truth. The darkness of hell enveloped me like a heavy blanket, but in the midst of that gloom the clamor of tormented souls resounded like a perpetual echo. The air was heavy with despair, and I knew I had to face what was before me. It was then that I saw Maria. She appeared like a pale specter among the flames. Her presence was almost ethereal, but the sadness in her gaze was unmistakable. Maria had a glow that once lit up her eyes, but that light was now off. I knew her story. A woman who had been full of life, a dedicated mother, loving friend, all that had been consumed by addiction. The first thing I noticed on her face were the marks of suffering, scars of a pain that seemed eternal. Her once silky hair was disheveled and lifeless, and her clothes seemed torn, mere shadows of what she once was. When she turned towards me I could see tears running down her face mixing with the heat of hell. "You don't understand. You don't understand what it's like to lose everything," her voice screamed, resonating amidst the howling of the hot wind and the wails that filled the space. She had a life full of love and dreams that vanished with one drink. Too many. I wanted to tell her that I understood, that I knew exactly what she was like. For years I had also been trapped in that same illusion, believing that alcohol could complement my life by filling voids I didn't even know I had, but at the same time I felt that any words I spoke would be irrelevant. In that moment of agony, her pain was my pain and I could do nothing but listen. My family said goodbye to me before my death. My husband couldn't take it anymore. My children cried for a mother who didn't listen to them. I walked away from everyone. What I thought was an escape became my burden. Maria spoke with raw emotion, each word draining more life from her already exhausted soul. As she spoke, memories began to come back to my mind. I remembered moments I never lived, laughter I never shared. The image of her small and innocent children stand out in my thoughts. I didn't know her family, but I could see the frustration and longing painted in her gaze. Inside me a wave of guilt grew and I understood that somehow my destiny could be the same as hers. The bleak future Maria projected could be mine if I didn't change. I don't know if I can bear this, she exclaimed, the pain in her voice almost breaking my heart. Living here in a prison I created for myself is the worst torture. Look around you, Jose. Look at all these souls. We are all a reflection of our choices. A toast for a drink and everything is lost. In that moment I understood that I was not only listening to her words but experiencing the depth of pain that Maria carried. She was not just a lost soul, she was a symbol of all of us who allowed addiction to dominate us. Each one of us carried the same story under different appearances, the same curse disguised as unfulfilled dreams. When I came home once I still had courage. I wanted to fight, but my children were there with eyes full of disappointment, and I couldn't bear it. I hurt them, Jose. I am the mother who was not there for them. I am a shadow in their lives, she cried, struggling in her agony. The desperation in her voice was almost unbearable as I looked at her. A feeling helplessness enveloped me. I wanted to hold her, to offer her some comfort, but instead I was trapped in the same web of regret that held her prisoner. Could I really help Maria? Could we lost souls find the light if we had no path to follow? Suddenly Maria fell to her knees and I felt my own breathing stop for an instant. The flames around her seemed to grow, but it wasn't the flames of hell that consumed her, it was the terrible weight of her own guilt and regret. You must do things differently, Jose. You have the chance I didn't have. Don't let alcohol have control. Your children need you, she pleaded, the urgency in her tone penetrating deep into me. Her words resonated like a bell in my heart. It was as if Maria was the voice of reason in the midst of despair. I saw the reflection of my own life in her eyes. I understood I could be just like her, condemned to wander through hell for all eternity. The terror projected on her skin, the pain that filled her heart was what awaited me if I didn't change. My vision of Maria kept dancing in my mind, her words engraved like scars on my heart. But as hell expanded around me, another being manifested in the darkness, and I knew that soul was Carlos. He was there, trapped in an unbearable cycle, a tragic image of someone who had been a close friend, now imprisoned by the pain of his choices. Carlos was always the kind of man who stood out, full of life and laughter. However, now that was not the image I saw. He was standing in front of a mirror, but it did not reflect the image he wanted to see. The glass was a window to his endless torment. He looked at himself attentively, as if he expected that at any moment the image he saw would transform into the ideal version of himself, the version without wounds, without vices, without destruction. Tears ran down his face, and although the scorching heat of hell enveloped him, he trembled. The mirror reflected not only his physical appearance but also his soul, marked by remorse. His face was emaciated with deep dark circles and pale skin. Each new look at the reflection only amplified his pain, a mental torture that kept him trapped in the past. He whispered to himself a mantra of self. I am a failure. I am nothing. Carlos. I called him, hoping he would sense my presence, but his attention was completely directed to the mirror. He reached out as if trying to touch his own reflection, and I saw his frustration grow. Why can't you change, Carlos? Why you can't be the person you should be? He asked himself with a voice cracked by dullness. The desperation and rage mixed in his tone were almost palpable. Now he was immersed in a form of suffering that went beyond physical pain. It was a psychological suffering, a constant review of his history. The image he saw in the mirror was not only that of a man marked by alcohol, but that of a father who could not be present, a friend left behind, a dreamer who became a shadow. As I watched him, the reality of his experiences began to unfold in front of me like a movie of fragments of his life. Carlos, like me, had let himself be carried away by the charm of alcohol. believing that each drink was an escape from his responsibilities, but now he faced the distorted truth that alcohol had created. Every time he looked in the mirror it was like consuming poison. He was grumbling not only on the outside but deep within his being. "Look at me, Jose, look at me. This is the life I built. A broken man without love, without family," Carlos said, the pain in his voice cutting me like a knife. What I understood was that trapped in his search for redemption in a distorted reflection, Carlos didn't just want to change the image he saw, he desperately wanted to get back what he had lost. An intense moment hit me as he began to hit the mirror with his fists, each blow a silent cry of anger and frustration. "I'm not like this, I'm not just this, I'm a man, a father, a friend, but what have I become, what have I made of myself?" His voice rose, overflowing with pain. There was a tragic beauty in his suffering. Even in the midst of the flames I could feel the intensity of his internal struggle. It was as if every version of himself, every memory was trapped there, reflecting the decisions that had led him to this abyss. And in that moment the mirror that reflected his image also became a source of pain. The darkness of hell continued to envelop me, but each new vision I found there added a new layer to my understanding of suffering. I knew that the soul that I would find next I would have another painful lesson to teach. It was then that I saw Rosa. She was a young woman, no more than 30 years old, but her face reflected a life of pain and regret that seemed to be centuries old. Rosa was on some kind of stage surrounded by an invisible audience, but she could feel the fixed gazes of souls lost around her. Instead of applause, what floated in the air was the fragility of her lost hopes. She held a fragile notebook in her hands with pages carelessly torn, and as I watched her I noticed there were scribbles of verses and poems, dreams that she could never make come true. Her gaze was fixed on the void, lost in her memories. I could sense the struggle within her, an artist without a stage, a dreamer trapped in the hell of her own choices. "Why are you here, Jose? You also got lost in your dreams," she said, her voice softly laden with sadness. There was a tragic beauty in her expression and I saw myself reflected in her in a disturbing way. I thought that art would save me, I thought that alcohol would make me more creative, more inspired, but what I didn't realize is that it destroyed me little by little, stealing my confidence and passion. I saw a tear slide down her face as she spoke and I remembered my promises, those I made to myself, that alcohol would make me more sociable, more interesting, but instead I had walked away from my loved ones, becoming someone I never wanted to be. I wrote poems about lost loves, about broken dreams, but no words were enough as I did. My talent was fading, the drinks turned to more alcohol and then I walked away from it all. I never painted again, I never wrote again. Her voice was like a song of lament where each word cut through the heavy air around us. The pain in his gaze was so intense, it seemed like I could touch her. "You feel alone, right?" I said, unable to contain the compassion bubbling inside me. "You isolate yourself in the pain and the guilt, and anyone who loved you is gone for it." The words I spoke were true and I felt it deeply. Addiction doesn't just deny pleasure, steals the essence of who we are. Rosa looked at me and her expression of pain and struggle made my heart feel even heavier. "I'm nothing now, let me show you," she said, looking away. Around her hell wasn't just a physical place, it captured every dream that once existed along with her hopes. Every note she played in her memory was like an echo losing its sound. Her creations once filled with joy were now memories that consumed her. The flames around me grew more intense and I felt a scorching heat as she recalled the days when she was alive and creative. Each memory she shared was accompanied by vivid images of blank canvases, unused brushes, unwritten pages. Rosa spoke of the day she decided to close her studio, the day she put that dream aside and replaced it with a bottle that promised consuelo. Her gaze almost broke as she remembered how everything worth living was left behind. "Jose, I want to go back, I want to get back what I lost, but it's too late," she screamed, the pain transforming her voice into a deep regret. "I'm not an artist anymore, I'm nothing anymore." The alcohol consumed me so insidiously that when I realized it was too late, her eyes were windows to an abyss without end, and I realized that her suffering was more than the pain of losing her passion, it was the pain of surrender and guilt. The alcohol had not only stolen her gift, it had imprisoned her in a cycle of despair and regret. Rosa was like a flame that had gone out, her light reduced to ashes. "You are none of that," I told her, raising my voice. "You are more than what was gone out. You are still here, and this fight for your life and your dreams can still be recovered. Fight for it, Rosa. Don't give up the intensity." My desire for her to see the light in the midst of the darkness was I wanted her to know that the true hell was to give up. Her eyes momentarily shone and I saw a small spark of hope ignite in her soul. "Do you really think I could do it?" she asked, the desperation still echoing in her voice. "What do I have to get back? My talent is gone, my inspiration is gone, everything that was is gone. The talented may be lost but never forgotten, the soul." My feelings reflecting in every word. Alcoholism is a prison that not only imprisons those who surrender to it but also causes deep wounds in all those who love and care. Innocent and helpless children look at who should be their protector and feel lost in a storm of disappointments and insecurities. Every act you took, every night you were away, they felt the voids your absence left. As he spoke, a feeling of deep regret began to settle in my heart. I remembered the nights my children looked for me, their gazes filled with pain, waiting for a father. I was not. It felt as if the words of Jesus penetrated like blades into my soul. He continued, allowing me to absorb every word, every image that arose in my mind. Vice distorts reality, distorts love, and what should be a home of joy becomes a silent and devastating battlefield. May suffer in the present, but the consequences will resonate for generations. I wondered, so what would be the cost of all that, not only for me but for the lives of those left behind? The weight of guilt accumulated on my shoulders, and with each moment that passed in his presence I wanted to transform myself more, to redeem each mistake, but I didn't know how. Jesus continued, his voice now full of hope. "For every tear you shed there is an opportunity for reconciliation and change. Suffering doesn't have to be your destiny. You can, if you allow it, become the force that leads you to the path of recovery, healing and redemption. Repentance is the first step. Recognizing your faults is already a form of liberation." Through his words I understood that my situation was not the end but the beginning of a new journey. For those I had hurt, for my family, I had the opportunity to correct my mistakes, to restore broken ties. The light that emanated from him was not only beauty, it was the gift of hope. Joseph has been chosen for this blessing. You have the chance to return, to change, and to truly become who you were born to be: a father, a husband, a friend. Change begins within you. Through his words I understood that my situation was not the end but the beginning of a new journey. For those I had hurt, for my family, I had the chance to correct my mistakes, to restore broken ties. The light emanating from him was not just beauty, it was the gift of hope. I felt life pulsating again in my body, a comforting warmth contrasting with the darkness of hell I left behind. With a start I opened my eyes and was greeted by a brightly lit hospital room surrounded by machines monitoring my condition. Confusion took over me for an instant, but the experience I lived, the vision of hell, the suffering souls, and the encounter with Jesus kept resonating in my mind. As my senses adjusted, I saw the familiar figure of my wife sitting next to me. Her eyes filled with tears but also hope. The love and concern reflected on his face reminded me of the reality of what I had lost. At that moment I understood that I was not only awakening from a coma, I was being reborn. Raising my trembling hand I was able to touch my wife. Some here murmurs rolled down my face. I had returned, but not just to revive. I was determined to rebuild everything I had destroyed. The opportunity for redemption was within my reach, and I would do whatever it took to heal the wounds I caused. It was time to fight, not only for myself but for my family. The life I had almost lost was beginning to take shape again before my eyes. With each passing day I remembered the words Jesus had told me, that repentance is the first step towards true liberation. It was a path full of challenges, but I was determined to walk it with. Each dawn I was surrounded by the voices of my family, the spontaneous laughter of children, the tenderness of my wife's hugs were those little things that had been affected by my addiction but now became the anchors of my new life.